Hey everyone, and welcome to the Explainer. We are jumping right into things today because we're looking at a truly incredible project proposal for Google's Gemma for Good hackathon. It's called Empathy AI. Now, right off the bat, I need to tell you this is not just another piece of software, it's a tool built from the ground up for deep social impact. Today, we're going to break down exactly how this pitch takes some really complex sociological theories and translates them into a tangible, ethical AI solution. So think about this for a second. What if AI didn't try to make everyone normal? Historically, a lot of tech designed around neurodivergence, like autism, for example, has operated on this fundamentally flawed assumption. It assumes that neurodivergent folks have a deficit, right? Something that needs to be fixed or corrected so they can fit into a standard neurotypical mold. Well, Empathy AI completely flips that script. And honestly, that's what makes this pitch so compelling.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, the double empathy problem. Then, we'll look at the bidirectional bridge. Third, how empathy AI actually works. Fourth, building interactional expertise. And finally, ethics, privacy, and safety.
All right, section 1, the double empathy problem, where we reframe communication breakdown. To really get why Empathy AI is such a game changer, we first have to totally shift how we look at communication breakdowns. For the longest time, we've leaned on this outdated pathology paradigm, basically the mindset of trying to cure or fix the individual. But under the modern neurodiversity paradigm, having a different neurological baseline isn't a defect at all. It's just natural human variation. So making communication work, that isn't just a job of the neurodivergent person. It's a shared responsibility across the board.
And that brings us to the absolute core concept of this project, the double empathy problem. This theory, developed by researchers like Damian Milton, says that when communication falls apart between a neurotypical person and a neurodivergent person, it's actually a mutual misunderstanding. Both sides have fundamentally different ways of processing the world, so they are both struggling to figure out the intentions and the mental states of the other person.
The project guide actually points out that tackling this specific mutual misunderstanding is the real trick to the whole thing. In fact, the original Portuguese phrasing calls it the pulo do gato, the cat's leap, to winning the hackathon. A winning solution has to have technical rigor, sure, but also a massive ethical commitment. It needs to focus on helping neurotypical people understand neurodivergent processing, instead of just forcing it the other way around.
Moving to section 2, a bidirectional empathy bridge, using AI as a cultural translator. So if the root problem is a mutual chasm of misunderstanding, the solution has to be a bidirectional bridge, right? Empathy AI fully embraces this two-way street concept. It never tells someone they need to change who they fundamentally are. Instead, it steps in as a sort of cultural interpreter. It actually explains how a message might be perceived by the other person based on their unique cognitive style. This helps break down those natural empathy blocks between in-groups and out-groups, cutting down on what the source material calls disapathy, or unfair snap judgments. Okay, but how do we actually build that? Well, the pitch maps the technical muscle of Google's Gemma model directly onto the neurodiversity movement's theories. It does this in 3 ways. First, as a context translator. Gemma analyzes a phrase and suggests how someone with a non-typical processing style might interpret it. Second, it's a bias alert. It literally flags when a neurotypical user types out pathologizing language, like saying someone suffers from autism, and helps correct it. Third, it acts as a perspective simulator, generating virtual scenarios where neurotypical users can safely experience things like extreme literality or sensory overload.
Okay, section 3, how Empathy AI actually works. Let's look at the user journey.
So we've got the theory down, but what does it look like to actually use this app every day? The document lays out a really clear 3-step flow. Step 1 is the alterity map, where you build out profiles. Step 2 is the diary of situations, where you log real-world scenarios. And step 3 is mutual learning and translation, where the AI steps in to offer perspective. Let's dig into these. Step 1, the alterity map, basically turns the AI into a logbook for building expertise. But here's the catch. You aren't logging medical diagnostic labels. Instead, you describe the singularity of the people in your life. You note their relationship to you, like if they're your boss or your nephew, and then you list their specific dispositions. You might note, hey, my colleague prefers written instructions, or they get really uncomfortable in noisy rooms, or they use very literal language. It maps out their landscape without pathologizing them. Then, let's say a communication breakdown happens. You go to step 2 and log it in the diary of situations. Imagine, you tell a joke at work, and your colleague seems offended.
Gemma jumps in and analyzes that interaction using a few super practical features. It offers tone and literality adjustments, pointing out that maybe your sarcasm was taken literally. It gives sensory contextualization, suggesting their reaction was actually sensory overload from the loud office, not them being rude. And it boosts your neurodiversity literacy, helping you swap out ableist medical terms for identity-affirming cultural ones.
Moving right along to Section 4, building interactional expertise. This is the ultimate goal.
You see, the point of Empathy AI isn't to be a permanent crutch. The really crucial takeaway here is this concept of interactional expertise. According to the document, this is the ultimate objective for social justice and emancipation. It basically means developing the actual, internalized skill to understand someone else's world and communicate effectively, even if your brains are wired completely differently. There's this incredibly powerful metaphor used in the source material. It describes EmpathyAI as a temporary social prosthesis. I love that. It's there to bear the weight and support your communication while the bridge is being built, spanning across those historical chasms of mutual misunderstanding. The end result? Expertise that stays. By using the app, going through this cycle of self-critique, and building critical consciousness, the user actually internalizes these lessons. After a while, you just start asking yourself naturally, wait, was I too literal there? You become skilled at navigating a neurodiverse world all on your own, and you eventually need those technological training wheels less and less. Which brings us to Section 5, ethics, privacy, and safety. These are absolutely non-negotiable. Look, you simply cannot have an AI tool mediating sensitive human relationships without some ironclad ethical guardrails. The guide demands strict compliance with data privacy laws, like the LGPD in Brazil, and the ethical guidelines of the Federal Psychology Council, or the CFP. That means total anonymization of relational data, absolutely no real names. It also requires heavy-duty red teaming to guarantee the Gemma model doesn't hallucinate offensive responses or reinforce any structural biases, making sure intersectionality is always factored in. But perhaps the biggest ethical role of the whole project is human centrality and no substitution. The AI is an auxiliary instrument. Full stop. It must never, ever replace clinical listening, professional judgments, or genuine human connection. The final ethical responsibility for any interaction always stays right where it belongs, with the human user. So, to wrap up this phenomenal pitch, Empathy AI represents a massive shift from fixing to culture. It totally rejects the notion of a correct brain and instead embraces neurodiversity as creative potential. It isn't trying to normalize individuals to fit into rigid systems. Instead, it gives us the literacy and the tools so that everyone can live in a more integrated, dignified way. It's a true instrument of social emancipation. Which leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought. We build technology to solve problems, right? But if Empathy AI actually succeeds in its mission, if it genuinely teaches us lasting interactional expertise and shared empathy, will its ultimate sign of success be the exact day it makes itself entirely obsolete? Something to chew on as you interact with all the different, beautifully wired minds around you today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.